Hi, friends. I'm Jeffrey Rickman. I'm a global Methodist pastor. I've been facilitating conversations and interviews with people who are experts in Methodism and from one sector or another, the academy or the church. Today, I'm going to be joined by the Reverend Scott Field, who is the leader of the Wesleyan Covenant Association. Of course, I interviewed his predecessor, Jay Therrell, about a year ago, and I have yet to sit down with Scott, and I knew that I needed to speak with him because at the close of General Conference a couple weeks ago now, a lot of things changed for United Methodists, and there are a lot of churches very anxious right now about their long-standing relationship with this denomination. Many conferences promised that local churches would be able to assess the situation after General Conference and discern if they wanted to disaffiliate or not, and it looks like the rug has been pulled out from under them. So I've had a lot of people email me saying, "What do I do? What can I do?" Tom Lambrecht and I spoke about this a bit the other day, but really Scott Field is the expert on this stuff. And if you don't know who he has long worked towards Methodist Reform and Renewal. He's served as a pastor in the Northern Illinois Conference of the United Methodist Church for 41 years. He served on the board of directors of Good News for 15 years, and along with an outstanding team, led the Reform and Renewal Coalition efforts at 4 general conferences in the UMC. He, along with his wife Lynda, were the local arrangement organizers for the inaugural gathering of the Wesleyan Covenant Association in Chicago in 2016, which had 1,800 people in attendance. Scott also took the lead to form the Northern Illinois regional chapter of the WCA and worked voluntarily there for 7 years before taking the helm here. His days were spent working within Northern Illinois to inform, connect, advise, and resource Methodists to the disaffiliation process for separation for the UMC. Scott retired in 2019, and Scott has been a part of the leadership council of the Great Lakes Provisional Annual Conference of the GMC and also serves on the Great Lakes Board of Ministry. So he's been all over. He has a great reach and experience, and I'm very pleased and blessed to have him on today. Just in case it's not clear, before I bring him on screen, I am intentionally making this conversation for people who are trapped in the UMC or feel trapped or want to learn how to explore these questions a bit more. I'm sure we will tap into other interesting stuff, but I want to be of benefit to you and your church. I know there are a lot of very anxious people about this right now, and I'm hopeful that the information that Scott and I cover right now will be of benefit to you and your church and will position you to go forward in an informed way. So, with that in mind, I'd like to welcome Scott on screen now. Scott, thank you so much for joining me today.
Jeffrey, it's great to be here and great to be part of your podcast. And I feel like I'm, in many ways, both because of my age and when I'm coming into the WCA, and since I'm following your interviews with Rob Renfro and Tom Lambrecht, I always say I'm called in out of the bullpen. I'm the closer, and that's on a lot of things. So that's kind of what I'm doing here and looking forward to this.
Yeah, I know you're the person to talk to. I know that a ton of people have been reaching out to you since General Conference to figure out a way forward. So we're going to cover a lot of the helpful stuff that you've said to people privately. Before we do that, I found a basic bio for you online, but what are some other important things for people to know about you, if anything, so they know how to process the information that you give them?
Well, I think a couple of things are important. One, though I was raised in the United Methodist Church, and we have generations of family that have been Methodists, the church I went to in what we call near suburb Chicago. So if anybody knows that territory, Chicago ends on the south side at 119th Street, and I lived at 127th Street. So I'm really about 8 blocks south of Chicago. We were very close in. And the Methodist church I went to when I was in middle school and high school, our youth group would go to Operation Push with Jesse Jackson, Reverend Jesse Jackson. And we were totally involved in racial reconciliation stuff. And I was, the high school I went to, the little town I lived in, suburban town, the high school was combined. One town was all white, one town was all black. When MLK Jr. was assassinated, we had riots. The school was closed down. All sports were canceled. We had police in the hallways. We had paddy wagons at the doors. It was a wild time. I got on board with actually my church's agenda, which was racial reconciliation. So I was involved in a whole lot of what in those days we called sensitivity training for different groups, school boards, school things. I became president of the South Suburban Council of Student Associations, and we did trainings through all the high schools and everything. But what I found, and this is actually an important piece here, really, I found that no matter what, unless the heart of a person is changed, this whole racial reconciliation, all the isms that were going on, there was no change going on, really. We were just dividing into little political tribes and see who had whatever power. So I went off to college to go into the family business, which is medical doctors for generations. And while I was there, this is Hope College in Holland, Michigan, the pre-med program, a foreign exchange student came, knocked on my dormitory door and told me he wanted to talk to me about Jesus. Now I said I knew everything about Jesus, right? Because I've been to, Jesus loves little children, all the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, they're precious in his sight. I knew all that stuff. And so I really didn't want to talk to the guy. But let's just say in what I now understand are situations orchestrated in some way by the Holy Spirit. Because I told the guy I wasn't a sinner and I didn't even need this atonement stuff he was talking about. I was at the top of my game and was going on. And I had left all that racial reconciliation stuff behind me because I found it didn't work. Everybody still fought. Mm-hmm. But just events that next week or so indicated to me that, wow, I really was a sinner. And I didn't quite live up to my own billing. And he showed up the next Sunday and said, do you want to, you were just on my mind. I want to talk to you again. We went to the student coffee shop. Hope's not a giant university. By the end of our conversation, I'm on my knees in the coffee shop praying to receive Jesus as my Savior. And then I got hooked up with an outfit called the Navigators, parachurch organization. And so I got into Bible study, scripture memory, witnessing on campuses. So I learned a lot of stuff. But when I came back to my own local church, I didn't know what to make of all that anymore. Because what I found out was my own heart was changed. And if there's going to be a change, it was something God was going to do, not just some political organizing and advocacy. Sorry for this long
No, I'm enjoying it. Keep going.
What got my call was in the old days, used to be pastors and churches would have Student Sunday, usually the Sunday after Christmas, so they could get a break. And they asked me to deliver a sermon, right? Because I'd been in the youth group and all. And I gave them my testimony from the pulpit. Because I was a new convert. I just told them about Jesus. And what happened was a number of the older members began crying. And they told me afterwards it had been so long since they'd heard somebody talk about Jesus as their Savior. It was like it wasn't a calling right then, but it was a really wake up kind of moment for me. And I did receive a call to ministry at a student ministry conference run by the Navigators, actually, at a Methodist school, Adrian College in Michigan, after struggling all night with that. But anyway, and I said, God, this is how arrogant of a person I was, Jeffrey. I just said, God, you tell me the toughest thing you got. That's what I want. And he said, Pastor. I said, Pastor, that is the weakest, whiniest thing to be. You have to wait for other people to throw money in a plate. You don't get any salary. You're like a parasite. How dare you? And I have found that actually was about the toughest thing, being a pastor. You may recognize that as well. So all of that to say, I went off to Gordon Conwell Seminary because the Methodist seminaries told me. I wrote to all of them back in the day when we got actual print catalogs from the seminaries. And they all wanted me to come explore a new faith for the future or something. And frankly, Jeffrey, I didn't know what the old faith was. I was pretty new. So I wanted to go someplace where I had to learn Greek. I had to learn Hebrew. I had to learn the scriptures, had to learn what the faith was that was handed down. And then my board of, District Committee on Ordained Ministry said they thought that I didn't have a sufficient United Methodist ethos. So I went to Duke immediately afterwards, and I did a master's thesis on how did we get from Wesley's trust clause that preserved the doctrine of the church in the preaching of Methodist preaching houses. From there to theological pluralism. How did that happen?
Right.
And which informed me on how we got off track. So
Right.
all that to say, then I was pointed to a little church to close it. It grew dramatically from 52 members to about 1,800 members. And we ended up with 2 campuses and building and all this other kind of stuff. And along the line, I said, I need to be hanging out with the evangelical people wherever I can find them. Mm-hmm. And so I was connected to Good News and all of that. But now I'm Wesleyan Covenant Association. So let's get on with people who feel stuck or wherever you'd like to go with this right now.
Yeah, I was wanting to connect with your personal story on so many levels. Of course, I'm a different generation, but a lot of commonality and overlap in how okay, maybe another conversation some other time. But yes, we need to focus on the needs of others, not the desires of me. So, okay, let me paint the broad strokes of the situation as I understand it. And then you provide a lot of the granular detail that informs kind of how people need to navigate this. Disaffiliation took place in the United Methodist Church in earnest for about a year. It was supposed to be for several years, but it didn't really move forward until the Judicial Council made some decisions and the annual conferences put some structures in place.
Right.
So in the course of about a year, about a quarter of the denomination's churches went through this process to exit the denomination. The language used was that they were given a limited right. It was a right to disaffiliate. But that was used by the Judicial Council to close the paragraph 2548.2 door, which was a much more free and open process for disaffiliation. And then there were other conferences that refused to use paragraph 2553, which had a sunset at the end of last year. And they used 2549 instead, which is the process of closing the church and then selling it back to its people or to another buyer. That's also the declaring exigent circumstances paragraph that can be a hostile takeover of an unwilling church. So a lot of annual conferences, each one had its own relationship with disaffiliation and went about things in different ways. Sometimes the bishop is more powerful. Sometimes the conference board of trustees is more powerful. All of that song and dance ostensibly ended at the end of last year. Mm-hmm. But in the midst of all that, a lot of churches had talked to bishops and district superintendents who said, you know what? Don't move forward on this until General Conference of next year. Based on what happens there, then if anybody wants to go, we'll let that happen. But then what happened at General Conference is that they closed all disaffiliation options, except for maybe 2549. And so I wanted to start with asking how it is that you're seeing the current picture with conferences still allowing disaffiliations. I've seen that Bishop Beard put out a statement saying he intended to abide by it. And I've seen Holst in annual conference say the same thing. But then I've seen, which conference was it on the other side? Indiana. Indiana said, nope, doors closed. You can't get out. I know we said some things that kind of sounded like we might let you out. We're not letting you out. When you do this overall picture, you might not have been able to get all the details in place now, but what's the picture that you've got as to how many conferences are still going to play ball with congregations versus how many are just saying, nope, you're trapped now. You can leave, but you can't take any of your stuff with you?
That's a great question and a really important question because, Jeffrey, as you indicated, what I've been saying is my email inbox is overflowing, and the phone messages are I could tell. In fact, my wife said yesterday, it being Sunday, she said it's going to happen today too, which was people went to church or they had a conversation with some folks over coffee at church, and so yesterday afternoon and evening, people are everything from we're going to go to the country club clubhouse someplace or wherever it is. We need a pastor. Can you get us a pastor? Others are like, we want to get out now. We can't believe this happened, and it sounds like there's no way for us to get out. And we think we have to start a new church. How do we do that? I mean, there's just a range of stuff going on. So let me make a few comments. The first is that, yes, indeed, there are some bishops who are giving in the U.S. that are giving the nod to when annual conference session comes up here in June 2024. They will put forward some kind of proposal or a process for departure, likely under 2549 paragraph, which is a closure and the trustees release the trust clause. Now, there may be some, in fact, there will be some requirements, usually a 2/3 vote in the congregation, it sounds like, and maybe some financial requirements. Some are saying it's just 1 year's apportionment. Some will say, no, it's going to be part of the value of the building or whatever. This is, on the one hand, the good news is that though the General Conference closed the doors, annual conferences have an existing option of perhaps working with a way to release congregations. The difficulty of all that thing is, though, you have to trust the trustees and you have to trust the bishop. And in conferences where they're in court, churches have sued and all of that kind of stuff, or even in a place like Northern Illinois. So we had, like, we're least among the tribes of Judah. It's a very small conference as it has decreased. When I started out, we had like 16 delegates to General Conference. Now we have 4. It's because our numbers have come down. But in this conference, we had, I think, originally 18 churches that wanted to get out through the disaffiliation process. 3 of them made it. And interestingly here, just to say this, it was the Korean churches that were treated the worst. Mm-hmm. In fact, all of those simply had to leave their property behind and go.
Oh, no.
And when I bring it up here in Northern Illinois, everybody says we don't trust the Episcopal leadership or the Board of Trustees to treat us fairly. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're not in that kind of a conference, I've been suggesting to people, write a letter. Just write a letter to the bishop, the chair of the Board of Trustees, maybe your district superintendent too, and simply say, given the actions of the General Conference and our awareness that some annual conferences are providing an additional opportunity for congregations to leave, we would like to appeal to you to provide that option to us as well. And that's only for this reason, Jeffrey. We don't know where all the bishops are going. This is just my take on this, and I may be wrong. But I hunch when the Council of Bishops meets next, whenever it is in late August or something like that, or early September, there will be enormous pressure put on bishops to not let anybody else go. There may be a request for a declaratory decision by the Judicial Council that says you can't use paragraph 2549 for disaffiliation. You can only use it for these, where there's, or require, which it does suggest there should be a long process to consider the viability of the congregation. So you could say, well, you might be able to leave, but we have a 2-year process that goes on to evaluate your viability in your community and everything else. So essentially, it just buries the thing in process. So rather than having a full-on charge from the WCA, because we were considering this, we will poison the well if we name names of bishops and conferences where this is going to go ahead. Because, as you said, we get maligned for being some kind of insurgent group. I'm just inviting local churches to make that contact. That's the first thing that they could do. The second one is, which is what's happened in a number of places where bishops or Episcopal leaders and conference trustees have not wanted to utilize this, and is either find a GMC nearby and you just are going to have to be a refugee and you're going to go to another place, or you start something new. Now, this will not be perceived probably with, I don't have better language on this yet, Jeffrey, but I call it the leavers and the leftovers. And what I mean, a vote failed in their church, but there's some other churches in the area that this happened with as well. And those folks get together. I'm thinking of a particular one here in Northern Illinois where people from 3 congregations formed a new congregation, and they're doing really very well. They joined up with the Global Methodist Church, and they're off and running. And the pastor of one of those churches also left with them, and so is leading that in a community. So the options so far would be see if your conference is going to allow, but you'll know this by July probably, is your conference going to allow an option for an extension of leaving or separating from the United Methodist Church? The other one is if you get connected with a Global Methodist Church in your area. And now the Global Methodist Church, so everybody understands this, they don't just send out church planters all over the country. Wherever there's no church, then they're going to put one in there. That's not how this operates. So there may not be one, and you may be in the process of how do we form a new congregation. I want to stop there for just a moment, if I may, and give a little advertisement, because the WCA this week will be launching what we call our consultancy series. And we have 12 different speakers who are going to present Zoom presentations, and then we'll upload them to our YouTube channel. But some of these are based on this some are on how do you get the finances together? That's the Wesleyan Investment Foundation. What do we do about legal issues of corporation or maybe legal action? Because there are legal actions we still have going on in 4 states. And that's the National Center for Life and Liberty. Those folks are going to be presenting. But one that's especially helpful, we're really delighted that Steve Cordell from the River Network is going to be doing 3 presentations. One is multiplying your church where it is. Another one on starting a new congregation, no matter the size of the church you're in. And then the third one, of course, is the micro church development, which is start a church in your own home and begin to build from there. We think those are helpful options, and anybody who's on the WCA email list will be getting the word on. There's an introductory one at the end of this week, and then they go week by week by week. As well as a bunch of others. We have some stuff on congregational health, Jeffrey, because some of the disaffiliated churches, which isn't our primary focus today, they are exhausted having come through that. And let's just say there's a lot of emotional fragmentation that's going on. So we have a Christian counseling person, Dr. Zaudi Abiadi, who he's a GMC minister now, lectures in Africa and in the States and runs a counseling service, but he's going to be doing a couple of presentations on healthy people who've come through traumatic times and how we can help our congregations get in better relational health and spiritual health.
Well, let's make sure to promote this in the show notes for this. I can put links to different things. So I hear you saying if somebody's on the WCA mailing list, they'll get information about this. Maybe we'll just put a link to get put on the WCA mailing list. Let me say back to you what I think.
It'll also show up. There'll be a separate landing page for that stuff on our website.
Okay, perfect.
At the end of the week. Anyway, so I'm wandering off.
Let me say what I've heard you say back to me, which is so far as actually lining out the specific conferences and bishops that are being more amenable to churches that want to disaffiliate, that's not particularly helpful right now because that's just going to put a target on their back.
Correct.
So rather than doing that, you're going to work directly with congregations by equipping them for whatever lies ahead. You've already advocated, at least at this point, writing a letter, making certain points. There is no draft letter that they can download at the WCA website, but they can draft something like that pretty easily for themselves. I wanted to ask you this question, and maybe you just don't have enough to even guess, but what percentage of the United Methodist churches in America do you think would want to get out if they could?
Well, I don't know if I have a target on that one. Okay. And here's why. I'm going to guess it's 40%.
Wow.
And the reason is not just over, and this, the presenting issue is always LGBTQIA plus issues. Mm-hmm. But I think what we saw with the pandemic, there are 2 things we've seen that aren't related to that. One was when we went into the pandemic, and then as Bishop Thomas Bickerton, president of the Council of Bishops, said in an interview with Molly Vetter, he said, we, the Council of Bishops, have, and he hesitated, but he said, I guess we've appointed ourselves essentially to run the place. And I take this to be, he wouldn't say it this way, I take it to be we've had a palace coup has gone on in the United Methodist Church, and that means conference leaders, particularly Episcopal leaders, not all of them, but many, and conference administrators, and then the administrators of our general boards and agencies have decided, despite the actions of the General Conference, particularly in 2019, they're simply not going to abide by that.
Right.
And so this is not like news to anybody, but that's sort of what's going on. And it demonstrated that the governance system, not the LGBTQIA stuff, the governance system of the United Methodist Church has collapsed.
Yeah.
People voted at the General Conference. People thought their apportionment money would go to one thing. It's going to something else. And even, very quick little story here. After 2019, I had folks in the church I was serving at that time say they didn't want the apportionment for the United Methodist Church put into the general budget. They would just do it as designated giving. I called the bishop's office. I talked to the bishop. I said, this is what's going on. I just want you to be aware. I'm not going to get in the way of this. I think that's the best we can come up with as a local church. And the bishop said, well, basically, I can't say anything because we are doing designated giving as an annual conference. We're withholding funds from the general church out of protest because of the traditional plan. Now,
oh my.
I'm just saying that the whole system has pretty much collapsed. So we have people in their local churches that just they don't trust United Methodism at this point. So when you say how many would leave, if the door was open and there was a pathway out, they, I believe, would like to get to some denomination that stands with integrity on what it says it believes and the decisions it has made. Mm-hmm. And so we've seen that right now at the General Conference of the UMC. We regularly pass resolutions against institutional racism. And what do? As soon as it becomes clear that the non-U.S. delegates are going to have the majority of delegates, we change the game. We regionalize the place so that nobody gets to tell the U.S. progressives what to do.
Right. Yeah.
Just when the U.S. progressives are becoming the tiny voice, So I would say, 40%. I don't know what's going to actually happen. I do think we're going to see dramatic departures, whether a congregation leaves or not. People are they're not putting up with all of this.
Yeah, I've had a hard time figuring out how much of what I see, the way things resemble reality, and how much of it I'm just kind of naive. One of the things that I know I meant to have you say at the very beginning was, I think you and I would be of the same mind that if there are local churches that are happy in the United Methodist Church, they don't feel like trust has been betrayed, and they feel like the decisions made a couple weeks ago do reflect them and their ethos, then the WCA is not at all interested in helping them leave the denomination or make them feel like they should be miserable. You and I want them to be happy and stay where they are. Do not leave the United Methodist Church, right?
I don't want any of them I don't know. I want them to stay where they're at.
Yes, right.
For several reasons, just stay with that tribe over there.
Yes.
That's fine.
Okay. I just thought it was important because a lot of the things that they say about you and about the WCA is, they just hate the UMC and they just want to take away as many churches as possible. And that really isn't the motivating thing here. It really is a much more fundamental. Local churches should not be constrained and coerced against their will. There's just something fundamentally wrong about that. And WCA was designed to help local churches get to where they need to go. And that's complicated by the longstanding presence of a trust clause where the denomination as trustees can make claim to the building and assets of any local church. So you and the WCA have stepped in a benevolent posture to try and help local churches get to where they need to go. You've done a good job. It looks like, right now everybody says a quarter of the churches got out, but when you look at 2016 numbers and where they are now, it's more like a third. So it really is quite exceptional. But then when you say another 40% went out, I would say probably 50%, but I can be more crazy than you. There really is still a lot of work left to be done. A lot of people would give up right now and say they've closed the doors, there's nothing left to be done. No, I still think that there probably are some things that can get done. So talk more about that, Scott.
Well, I also want to say one other thing
Yeah,
that
please.
I hadn't included before. WCA, interestingly, I always say we've had the confessing movement and others that I call are like the theological thinker types. WCA put together task forces that actually led to a lot of what you see in the GMC. But my view is the secret sauce for the WCA is the boots on the ground people. These are folks who have volunteered their time. They've formed regional chapters. They've built relationships now over, half a dozen years or more. And they're, even though the UMC administrators don't see us as credible sources of information, it's our folks that actually have gone to local churches. And in like cases where we weren't allowed to come into the local church. The pastor wouldn't allow it. So we'd meet at the American Legion Hall or something. And I would just do a review. Here's UMC. Here's other issues. Here's what's going on. You have some choices you can make. Those people are still around. In fact, I regularly, when I get these calls or emails, Jeffrey, I will get in touch with the person who's out in California, or the one who's in Ohio or Pennsylvania or North Carolina or wherever it is. And they're folks that are local, and they know the bishop, they know the district superintendents, they kind of know, some of them know those congregations, particularly that are calling in, and they're able to help kind of tailor what needs to happen in that setting. And they also are encouraging prayerful partners with churches that are trying to do that. So there's some things you can do with paragraph 2549. You can send a letter to the bishop or whatever. And I also want to say we're not going to provide a draft letter, because if bishops start getting, they do talk to each other. And if they start getting the same letter, they're going to know somebody is doing some stuff behind the curtain.
Sure.
But a contact with a person you can talk to is actually very important. And we provide that. WCA still has that in place.
Yeah, I went to the website just this morning and saw you still have regional directors that people can look up where they're from and get a hold of whoever's responsible in their region.
Right. And also, let me say, some of our regional groups are closing down because, as far as they're concerned, the action's over for 2553 disaffiliations, and most have come out. But even in those cases where it's closed, I call up the regional director who's been in that role and say, hey, could you get a hold of this? Or here's someone in this town in Ohio. Do you know someone there? And the network is really important. The relationships, we care about the folks and we care about the churches. And those are just the people who are part of the WCA network.
I wanted to run this by you and see what your response is, because I had this guy named Tim who wrote me. And he sent me links to purchasing sackcloth robes and shackles, and imagined there being a big public campaign from entrapped churches taking photos as congregations in these get-ups, just for dramatic effect, conveying. And so the larger thing that points to, I kind of love that, and I was like, man, that's crazy. I don't want to do that. But the whole mirage of the United Methodist Church is that, when you were actually at General Conference, they had so much scripted and staged to look like everybody was so excited and they're a new church and everybody's on board. And there are a lot that actually believe that, they hear a bishop say it and they watch the live stream and they go, yeah, everybody's real excited. The only way that mirage the emperor gets exposed as naked is when there are enough people saying, we are not on board. We are not happy with this. We want to go. And so it does seem to me that it would be in order to create some kind of centralized resource where they can just see all the churches that are not happy with this direction. And so I didn't know if anything like that. I hear you talking about private coaching and collaboration. I didn't know if there's anything, if that seems stupid, or if there's some reason why that wouldn't work, or if that really would be a legitimate way forward, just to give these churches some voice before they vote with their feet and just abandon their properties.
Right. Well, that's a great question. And so my answer is this. I'm waiting for June to go by and annual conference sessions.
Okay.
Because then I think we'll have a sense of, are there annual conferences where, how many and who's going on the record, as we have a process to let people go. And then we'll need to, at that point, I think maybe whether you want to call it a clearinghouse or you want to call it because I've also thought about, this is just thinking, some regional or larger gatherings of people where we get some videotape and we get some stuff that we can put up and we can begin to build pressure. Let me give you another little example here on how this can backfire. However, we had a case here in Northern Illinois where the bishop and conference sued a Korean congregation because it wanted they just said, we've had it. We built this place. We paid for this place. It's our place. I told the attorney, a local attorney was representing, I said, I don't think you're going to succeed in this. But the thing that was difficult was they also named the pastor, who had already been discontinued as a provisional elder by the Board of Ordained Ministry because he demonstrated what they call disloyalty to the Northern Illinois Conference by having conversations on disaffiliation. And apparently in an early morning prayer service, made a positive comment about the Global Methodist Church. And that was the sign of disloyalty. And that led to a cascading set of decisions that left him out. But the point was, he was already gone and he was included as a defendant in this case. And there was a claim about monies that the congregation had spent and needed, so there might be some financial penalties. Well, we were ready, and there was a group of Korean United Methodists ready to go and protest at the bishop's office right downtown Chicago. Signs, our bishop is anti-Asian. And I had contacted a local producer who had been a member of our church for the CBS affiliate in Chicago. He said, yeah, they would be glad to come cover that and get it on the television. So I said something to the attorney representing this pastor. He said, don't you dare do that. We're in negotiations. We're in negotiations for dismissal from the case. And if you out that bishop that way as anti-Asian, I guarantee you they are going to come back hard on us. And the reason I bring this up is in the back room of a lot of things, Jeffrey, it's like, boy, it would be great. We've got so much stuff that we could say and video we could roll. But is it the wise thing to do? Or is it damaging? So that's why I'm like, let's wait till June is done and we'll see who's on board where. And if they're on the record, because I know when they go to the Council of Bishops meeting, there's going to be pressure to not let anybody else out. And let's play the narrative. Bishop Bickerton was very clear. We need to change the narrative so that we're on our, journey into the new future here for the UMC. And they don't want all this stuff going on. And so I think we will reconsider at that point, how do we get protest made if it needs to be made? And secondly, will the protest lead to them being let go, or will they be stonewalled and just told, sorry, there's the door?
So I've been covering this stuff for a year and a half. I've been reporting on annual conferences, on individual churches taken advantage of, and it's been a consistent frustration for me. And yes, the world revolves around me, I know, or doesn't. That people will know that they're in the right and know that the conference has behaved wrongly, but lawyers will get involved, and lawyers want to control the process. And so they say, don't talk to that Jeffrey guy. Don't go on camera. Don't give him anything. Let's control the outcome. And it almost always works against the local church. I wish I could just plague leaders with this temptation to just release it all, because the God I serve, he says all this stuff is going to be revealed at the end anyway. I would rather have it be revealed right now. I just want to put everything out in the light, because this illusion. There's what the UMC is, and then there's how they want people to see them, and it isn't the same. And the only way that gets revealed is by revealing it. And so, and that's not to say I hope that they misbehave in such a way that then y'all have no recourse but to reveal everything. I just wish that local churches and their leadership would just go ahead and blast everything, because right now, what we've seen at every turn is that the institution has no qualms about using everything they have at their disposal to hurt local churches and squeeze every last penny out of them. I'm just so embarrassed for churches who think that they're being wise and discreet, and then they're getting like the worst possible deal that they could get. So you're going to do what you're going to do. Let's talk about a timeline. Let's talk about a timeline because, okay, nobody is currently being allowed to disaffiliate. You're saying at annual conference this June and July, a lot of conferences will put a plan in place. Maybe
Some will
some.
put it. It's not necessarily a lot of
Sure.
some.
Okay. And so, but then that will still put them on a timeline that if the judicial council or the bishops complicate things, could get
Yes.
aborted. And so if I were in a local church, I would be wanting to understand the timeline, where to put pressure, how to expedite things. When is the next bishops meeting? When is the next judicial council group getting
Correct.
together? And then how realistic is it to hope that annual conferences can fast track something before those things happen?
Well, I don't know. It depends on the decision of the Judicial Council. Actually, if we got into that scenario, like is it retroactive? You can't do it. You can't do it going forward. I would just say as soon as if some kind of proposal is made at an annual conference session, Jeffrey, I would be standing next to the conference secretary, say, put our name on the list. We want that now, and move very quickly.
Yeah.
And you may be aware some conferences, Wisconsin comes to mind, put together, I think it was a 17-step process for disaffiliation. And if you miss one step or one timeline, you're out.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a process, but it was, it was sort of like, skating through a swamp full of alligators or something. It's crazy. So almost impossible to do.
Sure.
So there will be some conferences that might do that. I do think though, just jump at it quickly. And it may be that the declaratory decision is not done. I mean, this is the be wise as serpents and innocent as doves kind of a thing. How do you want to be here? But my point is we're going to know probably by the 1st of July, where is that available? And then secondarily will come the question of, okay, now what other things do we do to bring attention? You're exactly right that when you get a smaller group that brings public protest and calls out the either unfairness or the hypocrisy of an institution or a government, that gains traction. And so I think that's certainly in the possibility of tactics, if you will, for what we would do. But let's say one other thing here. Many of the congregations that are feeling stuck right now are the so-called purple congregations, or the ones that are in the middle. They don't necessarily have the 2/3 vote or whatever. Mm-hmm. And there's not a happy ending in terms of all of us are going to come to the same agreement and we're all going to walk the same path. Mm-hmm. That's just going to be a hard spot. You may decide that you can't be part of the United Methodist Church, and you may need to find another place to be, whether you start a new church or you're going to attend a different church. That could be a possibility.
Let's. There are two more things I want to ask you. The first is, what's there to say about those who have gotten out and don't care about those left behind? And then what's there to be said about all of this is focused on the American context so far, but we really should speak to the non-American. So if you could go ahead and speak to whatever you want to say about those who have gotten out and now, well, I've noticed there are a lot who just don't care about those who are left behind. And then I even noticed some who are offended at those who do care about who's left behind, and they will shame people for caring about what the United Methodist Church does. So what's there to say about these people?
Well, if you mean, do I want to have a judgment call on them? I do. I think you're not paying attention here. Because I had, you may have read this. There was somebody who put up a post, I think it was on X. And it was related to another person who was talking about the UMC, even though this person is GMC now. I won't get into the specific names, but anyway, the person said, "Hey, will you quit stalking your ex? You've left. Get out." And my response, though I didn't respond directly to that individual, was, "Are you kidding? we're not talking about a divorce. We're talking about a house on fire. Mm-hmm. We want to race and get most people out that want to get out of that place. They may not recognize the danger they're in right now. So some of it is for us to remind people who are still, and I run into this in my own developing GMC conference. No, we're facing forward. We're not looking back. We're not doing anything. We're out. We're moving on. Well, there are others who would like to move on, but they are not out yet. Mm-hmm. So what is the thing we do that helps support them and keep a lifeline in there for them to look at some other decisions? So the only thing I would say to them is, don't you realize the house has been burning? You got out, but why don't you turn around and help rescue somebody else? I just don't understand why people would turn their back at this point. Part of it is, I think, animus toward the United Methodist Church overall. Mm-hmm. And so you just don't want to even deal with it if you've gotten past it. But these are individuals. These are sisters and brothers.
Yeah.
So second thing I would say very quickly is, for those who are stuck and can't get out, mm-hmm. There's a whole lot to say. And I'm going to be part of this video series thing we're doing, the Zoom series. I come up at the end of June, actually, called Leading from the Second Chair. And what I mean is, you do have places, if you're in a congregation, where you have influence and you have relationships. That doesn't mean you get to turn the whole congregation around, but you will probably find there are some faithful sisters and brothers there, and there's a fellowship within the bigger congregation that may or may not become a beachhead for dramatic change, but at least it can sustain you until God leads in whatever direction God's going to lead in the future.
Yeah, so that makes sense.
I'll be doing a thing on leading from the second chair.
Okay.
Or influencing from the second chair.
Well, I chose to focus mostly on the American context for this conversation because that's where real estate values are the highest, and that's where annual conferences and the denomination is going to be the most litigious. But that's not to say that American United Methodists are the only ones theologically or morally anxious right now. What I've assumed all along is that a ton of non-American churches and conferences are just going to get up and go, and the United Methodist Church is going to let them and not really try and take them to court and take their stuff. Has that do you think that's a safe assumption to make, or do you think that the UMC might even try and hurt some of these non-American churches that don't go through the process?
I don't think that's a safe assumption for two reasons. Not so much the litigation and property. It's so I don't want to be uncharitable here because this is not uniform. Mm-hmm. But some of our bishops, Episcopal leaders in central conferences, that means outside the U.S., have a very comfortable position they're in, and compensation and notoriety. So they're in no hurry to let this disaffiliation thing come into their area. And that means there's a good deal of pressure put on pastors, and in fact, in some ways, quite punitive. If you stand up and say you're thinking about disaffiliation, you may be appointed elsewhere. You may lose your position. Mm-hmm. And in some of these conferences that I'm thinking about, the parsonages are also owned by the conference. And so if you get, as a pastor, if you get on the wrong side of the line with the bishop, you not only lose your job, you lose your house, your family has no place to stay. It's quite dramatic. So I'm not saying it's the UMC is going to try to go after property. It's just going to be, who are the Episcopal leaders? Mm-hmm. So in certain annual conferences outside the U.S., the Episcopal leaders, the bishops, are very clear. They do not approve of the decisions of the General Conference, and they're going to allow for, in fact, they may lead the whole annual conference to leave if they have that opportunity, and they may, mm-hmm. because there are different civil laws on who owns what property and who controls what. So I would just say right now in other places, let's say the Philippines particularly, as well as Africa especially, it's a very mixed bag on what's going to happen there. And One thing that's very unfortunate, I think, for Africans is they were sold on regionalization as a place that they have local control. But the new social principles that were revised, including the definition of marriage between two people, yes, also a man and a woman, but that's a subset of just two people. They don't get to change that.
Nope.
That's the social principles go across the whole thing. And they're going to be sending whatever apportionment dollars they send to the UMC will support married gay or lesbian bishops that are over the whole church, not just them. So they can't say our money won't support things we don't agree with, or our social principles in the country they're in will have to say, no, these are UMC social principles.
Yeah.
Oh, and one last thing. The thing that's the General Board of Global Ministries has been given the assignment now, not so much like those of us who are traditionalists think we ought to tell other people about Jesus, is to provide resources at all levels of the church, including internationally, to overcome heterosexism and xenophobia, transphobia, homophobia, all the phobias. And if I'm a church that's been formed by missionaries and now the mission organization is going to come and train us, this is going to be very hard, very hard. So anyway, I don't know what to say about the outcome of that one. It's not going to be easy or good.
Yeah, man, I don't know what's harder to guess, what's going to happen within the U.S. or what's going to happen outside of the U.S. So there are just a lot of moving pieces, and you're going to be tracking a lot of those and be a part of a lot of these conversations that are happening. So I appreciate you sharing just kind of a snapshot of where your head's at. One last question. How would you, for people who spend their time with us, how would you ask them to pray?
That's a very good question. I would ask for several things. I would probably just focus on first the fruit of the Holy Spirit in the lives of those who are engaged in this. And what I mean by that is we want to press whatever case needs to be pressed, but we don't want to do it in ways where we're on the attack. I think that's important. But the other one is I would pray for, I'm sorry, this is a prayer I've had for a long time. It's my revive them or remove them prayer. And that's just, God, by your Holy Spirit, revive those who are wandering in the darkness or confusion, or remove them from positions of influence so that your work for the kingdom can go forward. And then you just follow the steps. I've never had a strategic plan, Jeffrey. I just, what's the next thing in front of me?
Sure.
So revive or remove. And that's the way I pray.
Well, I think it'll be great, friends. Whenever you're done watching this video, go ahead and pray for Scott and for the Wesleyan Covenant Association and for all these congregations left behind. And I think those are all fantastic prayers to say. If you've watched this conversation and you don't really know about all of the things that happened in Charlotte at the last General Conference, you might go to my conversation that I posted with Tom Lembrecht this last week. He really did a really good job summarizing all of the different theological, ideological shifts. I came to the conclusion that the United Methodist Church is now a wing of the far left of the Democrat Party in the U.S., and that is not to be hyperbolic. I really do mean that quite literally, not in a financial way, but in a theological way. And then also, viewers, I would urge you to stay tuned to PlainSpoken. I'm going to have Simon Mafunda, who is the African WCA leader, on this Friday for a follow-up, and he can tell us a lot more about what's going on the African continent and what transpired at General Conference. So look for that next week. There should be a lot more stuff coming up that hopefully will equip you and your churches to make good decisions. So I appreciate y'all staying with us this whole time. And Scott, I just want to thank you for setting aside the time. I know you're so busy right now, so thank you for setting aside the time for me and my audience as they make their way through this.
Glad to be part of it, and glad to know, Jeffrey, that you have, even though you're what I would say you're in Oklahoma, right?
Yeah.
But you have a way to reach others, and it's great information for people to actually engage and interact in a conversational style. So thanks for your ministry.
Yes, sir. Happy to do it. All right, friends. Well, that's going to close out our time. If you haven't already, I just saw today that 60% of the people who watch me are not subscribed on YouTube, at least. So if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe. It's going to be good for you. I'm going to give you good things. So subscribe, and then I would ask you to pray for me as well as I try and be good to y'all, while also the Global Methodist Church has its upcoming convening conference in September, and I want to build up my new denomination as I'm able. And so there's just a lot of really great things happening right now in a tight timeline. So you know how to be in prayer for me and for Scott and the things that we're attached to. And I'll thank you in advance. All right, friends. I'll see you later.